Jo's Discovery. Written by Margaret Klein. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Holiday. Jo just couldn't believe it. She'd read about stuff like this happening in stories. But to her? No. Jo read heaps of books, all kinds of books. Some of them talked about sending kids off to relatives. And here it was, in real life, happening to her. Her mom and dad weren't going off to nurse a sick aunt or grandparent. They'd won a trip to Paris. "We'll only be away 3 weeks," her mom had said, unable to contain her smile. "You'll love where my Aunt Frida lives. It's nothing like here, so different, so desolate, quite romantic really. It'll be a great change. Think of it as an adventure." Jo simply didn't believe that no television, no computer, no video and no shopping center could have anything to do with romance, let alone adventure. Mom must be thinking of Paris. Jo was sure of that. She sighed and went to her room to decide what to take. She would need heaps of books, plenty of writing paper, pens and pencils. The first story she had ever written had just been published in the school magazine and she wanted to write more. Jo had decided that she wanted to be an author when she grew up. Her mom had bought her a journal with a picture by a French artist on the cover so that Jo could write about her stay. Jo couldn't imagine what she would find to write about at Great Aunt Frida's. Now if it were Paris the day her parents were to leave for Paris, Aunt Frida and Uncle Rex came and picked Jo up to take her back to their place. Uncle Rex was as round and red as Aunt Frida was thin and pale. What they had in common was that they both smiled a lot and they often finished each other's sentences. After waving goodbye to her parents, Jo climbed into Uncle Rex's old car, and off they went. "Come on now, you'll have a lovely..." And before Uncle Rex could finish, Aunt Frida would chime in. "Yes, she'll have a lovely time. Won't take long. No, won't take us long to get there. Be home in time. Be home for dinner, but it might be. Yes, it might be dark by that time." Jo couldn't help smiling. They were something like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, with different shapes. Jo sat in the back of the car, gloomily gazing out the window. 3 whole weeks, she murmured. 21 days, 20 sleeps, 1 fortnight plus 1 week, 3/4 of a month. The more she thought about it, the longer the time seemed to stretch before her. The car's rhythm carried her along and the next thing she heard was voices. Chapter 2. The Adventure Begins. Here we are at home. Yes, home at last. Won't be long until... No, dinner won't be long. The 2-story house was right off the road, nestled between 2 hills. Uncle Rex will take... Yes, Ely, take your bag and show you your room. Jo's room was upstairs, and through its window she could look up the valley to where the hills met. She could see horses in the distance, and closer to the house there were hens, ducks, a goat, and 2 dogs. At dinner there was a boy about 2 or 3 years older than Jo. "This is Tom Radcliffe. He's your Uncle Rex's." "Yes," finished Uncle Rex, "he's my grandson. He'll take you." "Yes," agreed Aunt Frida, "Tom will take you riding tomorrow. Comes up to go to the riding school. He's very talented." Thanks," said Jo, who had never been on a horse. After dinner Jo decided to unpack. She climbed the stairs and was about to go into her room when she heard piano music. It was coming from the room down the end of the small corridor. Jo walked down past 2 doors and then listened outside the 3rd. What beautiful music it was! She knocked on the door, softly. "Come in then," a voice said. "I hoped you'd come. They told me you were here." Gently, Jo turned the knob and entered a room very similar to her own in size. But the view from the room was very different. The window in this room looked down the valley. In the distance was the main road. Jo's room had only a bed, a wardrobe, and a dressing table. This room didn't look like a bedroom, and it was crowded to say the least. Bookshelves lined one wall, with the books so stacked and packed that there was hardly room for anything else. And every other wall was covered with photographs. An old phonograph stood, still playing, in the corner. There was a wardrobe, a chest of drawers, a desk, and lots of other furniture. Every available surface was covered with glassware, china, and ornaments. And there were a lot of horses. Horses on plates, horses in photographs, books about horses, china horses, and trophies and ribbons with horses on them. An old lady sat in a big chair, positioned so she could see the view. Chapter 3. Great-Great-Aunt Johanna. "Come and sit then. I don't get many visitors." "Jo, they say your name is." "Jo. That name is in the family. I am Johanna too, and that's what I was called, never Jo. Come and sit down." The voice was quiet and lilting. Jo sat down opposite Johanna. This must be Great-Aunt Frida's aunt. That would make her very old indeed. On the wall behind the old lady was a large photograph of a beautiful young girl and a young man, in riding gear, both holding their hard hats. The photograph was in a silver frame decorated with entwined roses. "Mom would like this," thought Jo. "This is romantic." The old lady spoke again. "I've lived here always. My family has lived here for such a very long time. Families don't keep in touch like they used to. Go off to the city and work. I was left here all alone, surrounded by my memories." Jo nodded. "When my niece and her husband moved in to look after me, I couldn't bear to part with things, so we brought them up here." Jo looked around her, curiously. "No, I don't sleep here," Johanna continued. "I sleep in the room next door, but I spend all my time here. I like the view." Her voice faltered. "I can still see him riding down from the hill, getting closer to the house and—" Jo leaned forward as Johanna's voice faded. Then her gaze returned to the photograph. "I was one day short of 18 in that photograph, and Robert, well, he was older. He was all of 21. She gave a short laugh. "We thought we were so old." Jo looked at the old lady. "Is that really you?" she whispered. "That photograph was taken nearly 70 years ago. I'll be 88 in 2 weeks' time. And yes, it really is me." As Jo looked closer, she could see that it was. The same eyes and the same heart-shaped face. As then, her hair was piled on her head, except now it was white. 70 years ago. Things had been very different then. No television, videos, or computers, but there had been cameras. "Where's Robert now?" she asked, knowing the response would be a sad one. But when the answer came, it was even sadder than Joe could have imagined. Chapter 4. An Unsolved Mystery. Robert died.